Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Libertarian Voter. Today we're discussing the current polling and why that polling may not be as accurate as commonly reported. If you've been watching the news, I'm sure you've seen polls showing Biden well in the lead. As of today, Monday, October 19th, Biden is listed as having 51.4% of the vote, with Trump at 41.9%. Taken at face value, that would normally indicate that Biden has this in the bag. However, many people have raised reasonable doubts about this conclusion. The polls in 2016 were not very optimistic about Trump's odds, either in the primary or the general. Many places said Clinton had odds in the 90% range for the general, with some as high as 99%. Even the most reserved polling aggregator, 538, gave Trump approximately 30% odds. If the polls were inaccurate once, couldn't they be wrong again? It's a fair question, and one that makes pollers defensive. They note that they've located the errors made last election, and in most cases, they've fixed them. We can be relatively sure that they won't err in exactly the same way as 2016, but that's not a guarantee that they'll avoid making a different error. So, some caution's warranted, but an error isn't necessarily good news for Trump, since errors can fall either way. So, why do I think we might want to be extra wary about polling conclusions this time around? Well, a look at the fundamentals gives us some other indicators to work with. First of all, election funding is traditionally considered a very important factor, with whoever raises the most money having a better shot at winning. As of right now, Biden has raised about $990 million, and Trump has raised about $1.33 billion. That's a significant edge for Trump, and while someone with more money can certainly still lose, Trump, after all, overcame an advantage in 2016, it is rare for a candidate with a large funding edge to get a huge blowout, as polling would suggest. Secondly, we have the economy. This one's a bit more mixed. Traditionally, a good economy is considered a slam dunk for a sitting president, with most of them winning re-election. Trump's pre-COVID economy was unarguably excellent, but the pandemic response created the economy pretty badly. While that recovery is still underway, we're still not back to where we were, and this thorny situation means that it's not really clear who's got the advantage in this. We've got mostly a partisan reaction, with those considering Trump responsible for the pandemic considering the economy to be bad, while those who see it as an unavoidable circumstance that he couldn't really have avoided see him as strong in the economy. Polling by Pew shows, overall, a very slight majority is saying Trump is stronger in the economy. This is probably a slight edge for Trump, rather than the usual strong indicator, but still, it doesn't match the Biden blowout some are expecting. Third, we have voter enthusiasm. I've seen a remarkable enthusiasm gap with Trump voters holding rallies, putting up signs in vast numbers, and of course, the aforementioned donations. A common counter-explanation is that while Biden voters are not enthused for Biden, they are motivated by dislike of Trump. This is possible, we certainly see many signs of dislike, but generally enthusiasm for people stirs more turnout than dislike does. Last, but certainly not least, winning the majority vote isn't strictly necessary. In 2016, Trump was elected with only 46% of the popular vote. If the votes end up breaking down the same way as in 2016, we'll get the same result. The popular vote could diverge even further from the electoral winner if we see states behave differently from one another. For instance, I could see a high turnout in California due to the universal mail-in voting they've done. If that's the case, then they'll add Democratic votes. However, California is going to go for Biden in any reasonable scenario, so increased turnout there is not going to translate to any electoral vote changes. It's even possible that Trump could win with 44% of the vote, so he doesn't necessarily need that much of a gain over what the polls are showing to be a contender. So, with all these indicators pointing at least weakly in Trump's direction, how do we reconcile this with the polling? If we're seeing different results, why is that? Well, we don't know for sure yet, but one probable guess is the pandemic. Not only has this changed voting significantly, likely altering voter patterns and turnout numbers in ways that are very hard to predict, it's altering life in other ways that could affect polls. For instance, Democrats are generally more in favor of drastic anti-pandemic measures. This could mean that more Democrats are staying home from work, being more available to answer the phones for traditional polling. That would introduce a systemic data skew favoring likely Democrat voters. It's hard to verify this, as we don't really have modern elections in a pandemic to compare against, so your guess is as good as mine for this, but it's something to consider for larger possible errors. Other less 2020 specific concerns exist as well. Traditional telephone polling may be getting less and less relevant in the modern age. Like many millennials, I've never had a landline in my home. This impacts polling because most traditional polling is done via landline, as laws strictly restrict what you can do with calling cell phones. As we age and vote more frequently, millennials will impact elections more, but we're harder to poll accurately. Lastly, third-party candidates can also impact the race. This is usually pretty unlikely to outflip any battleground states, but it can account for a fair amount of general voting skew. In 2016, the Libertarian Party took about 3.3% of the general vote, the Green Party another 1%, and other candidates got an additional 0.7% between them for slightly over 5% of the vote in total, which is a substantial number. Polling for third-party candidates appears roughly similar this time around, but there's very few polls to work from because very few polls accurately poll third parties. For instance, in 2020, no poller at all appears to have polled for third-party options in Alaska, a state that gave over 12% of its vote to them in 2016. For this reason, third-party popularity is poorly accounted for, and we don't fully know what effects it might have. Now, I'm not saying that you should discount polls entirely. They do remain one metric of popularity, and they are a useful source of information. Just keep in mind the other measurements as well, and form your own assessment. I'm eyeballing this race as about a 50-50 shot as of right now, but if you feel differently, let me know in the comments. Thanks for listening, and have a great day.